Viewabill's first Inside, Outside, and Together conference. We're so thankful that all of you can make it today, and hopefully this will be a worthwhile and even enjoyable webinar for everybody. Before we get started, I'm just going to give a quick introduction about what our goal here today is, and also sort of logistics in terms of how it works. So the thing about running a startup is that hundreds of times a day you make decisions based solely on how you think things stand. And oftentimes you're wrong. Most times, I guess, you're wrong. But the worst thing to get wrong is who your target customer is. When we launched Viewabill in March of 2013, we thought our customers were lawyers and legal clients. And as a former lawyer myself, and as a human being, it's only logical that I would view my own company through my own lens. But I was wrong. Not a big deal, but it's not that I was just wrong, I was short-sighted, and that is a big deal, especially when it comes to who your target customer is. And over the past few months, we've noticed a major change in the legal industry. It's been a fundamental shift where legal tech is no longer just an amorphous concept coupled with the word legal. It's becoming a movement. And for us, the wake-up call is that the change is not coming necessarily from the lawyers. It's coming from the people involved in operations within the legal departments and the law firms. This roundtable discussion is, like everything in the startup world, a little by the seat of our pants. Our goal here is to spur conversation because, in our view, conversation itself is worthwhile. And that's how everybody can understand everybody else's expectations, and together we can move the legal industry forward. So we want to bring people together today who can actually change things from an operational standpoint, because that seems to be where change is taking place from. And we have panelists here whose brains we are hoping to just pick. And we don't know exactly where these conversations are going to turn to, what's going to come out of them. But with the panelists that we have here today, hopefully we're able to get a true picture of where legal tech stands. So with that, I'm going to, actually, before I talk about the agenda, just some logistics. First of all, everybody should feel free to ask questions. There's a button on your GoToWebinar dashboard, I guess we can call it, where you can ask a question, and you should see a question mark. I don't see it because, as an organizer, I guess I don't have the question mark. But if you have a question and you want to speak, you can also raise your hand. And the raise your hand function, it's the thing that looks like a do not walk sign, the hand that looks like do not walk, that's actually raise your hand. So please feel free to shoot questions. We'll try to have time for people to answer questions and address those. And hopefully what we're able to get out of this is an organic overview of where legal tech is. So today's meeting is going to be in total 2.5 hours. We're going to end at 3 o'clock Eastern. We have 4 discrete focuses. The first focus is friends in need, and the goal with that topic is to discuss how legal departments and the operations within law firms are able to work together. The second one is measuring up, and that is about the types of metrics law firms and legal departments can be using, and that will be moderated by Ken Grady. The third one is transparency, and we're going to talk about how transparency can affect behavior, or even what is transparency and what is too much, too little. And our final presentation, which will be moderated by Pratik Patel from Elevate, will be an overview and discussion on legal tech and the way forward. To start us off, we're going to showcase NetApp. I'm going to give a quick introduction here and then hand it off to Connie Brennan and Mike Haven from NetApp. But from our perspective, we've been working with NetApp for almost a year, and the types of innovations that NetApp tries to put forward and is willing to try in hopes of moving the entire industry forward is amazing. And they seem to be one of the leaders in the industry. And what I'd like to do today, just to get us started, is to have Connie and Mike tell us a little bit about their processes and how they view legal tech and their department. And we'll use that to kick us off. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Connie and Michael.
Hi, thanks so much for the nice introduction. We thought that it might be interesting to start the day off with kind of an overview in trends. And as you pointed out, NetApp Legal is cutting edge. And so we're kind of like the Mikey. We'll try anything. We are beta testers for almost all the new technology that comes out. And we are willing and anxious and courageous in the sense that we don't mind making mistakes and learning from them and moving forward. So our intent is to put up a couple of slides and let you know what the 2015 initiatives are, since this is an inside-outside roundtable. A lot of this is geared toward outside counsel so that you can better appreciate some of the challenges that we're facing and some of the initiatives that we're putting into place. You can assume that NetApp's a little bit further out in front, but we will, if you can pick up anything from what we're doing today, I can assure you that the rest of the industry will be hand in hand with us shortly. So the first slide, and Dan, who's running this slide deck? If we could go to 2015 initiatives.
Yep. And Connie, I'm flipping through your slides, so 2015 initiatives is what we're showing.
Okay, that's great, because we don't have the WebEx up because we're having some audio difficulties. So we're going to have to just go over the phone on where we are. First of all, legal departments are now being required to run like a business. And so we are putting into place some foundational structure that in the past has not been front and center. So I have a couple of visuals. I'm not going to go into any of them deeply. I just want to set the stage. So the first is a strategic roadmap. So we have, and that's the next slide, we have started a 3 to 5 year strategy program within the department, and we started with words, and we moved the words into a visual strategy. So that's what you're seeing on the screen now. It's our 3 to 5 year strategic roadmap. Our goal is to be the best legal department in the world. The second part of running legal like a business is putting together a long-term IT strategy roadmap, and that's the next slide. Again, I'm not going to talk to it. I'm just going to let you know that we have it. We are working with the enterprise IT team to put this together. Enterprise architecture has been a wonderful partner because many of the technologies that legal touches go enterprise-wide. Some of them being contract management and electronic signature are a couple of examples. Okay? Trends in efficiency and spend management, again, very closely related to running legal like a business. We are starting to put in place regular preferred partner programs, quarterly business reviews as they're known in other parts of the business. And on the slide, performance summary slide, that's just an illustration of one of the pages that we present to outside counsel at one of our QBRs, or preferred partner meetings. I should say that Elevate is a strategic partner of NetApp, and they have been big contributors to the structure of the preferred partner template that we take in, and they also run all of the numbers that go into that presentation, into that meeting. Am I missing anything? Okay. Okay, so second example, of the preferred partner program is, one second, I'm out of order here. Oh, is the performance summary, and that's just, it is a qualitative and a quantitative scorecard that we take in each time we meet with the partner. We run the numbers for the quantitative side, and then we send out a survey to the customers who are using the outside counsel law firm to provide feedback for the qualitative side of that. Second, we are running metrics like crazy within the department. This slide, instant NDA results, is simply an example of some metrics that we have run on technology that we've put into the department. So you can see at a glance that we have saved time and money by putting a fairly simple technology into the enterprise. So the instant NDA has had a huge adoption rate because it touches everybody in the company. It was simple to implement, and the cost savings are extreme. The next slide is our legal expense dashboard. So not only do we run metrics and analytics, we then are able to put it into a dashboard. The attributes of an efficient legal department come from an article that was recently written on what elements should be reviewed or advanced to be a best-in-class legal department. Some of the metrics on the left side, spend as a percentage of revenue, are typical metrics that are measured across the industry. And then at the bottom you see some of the cost savings that we've actually realized. Okay, and finally, I'm going to talk about the legal ecosystem. So on the call, I think primarily our in-house, well, actually, no, this call is very well represented by the legal ecosystem. So it used to be that in-house and outside counsel were the primary participants in the ecosystem. That is changing drastically and changing quickly. Viewabill is a good example of a new entrant to the ecosystem that's making a difference in how we run a department. We have developed associations that are going across and involving different participants. It used to be just the law firm partners, and now we are having regular conversations with the CIOs, the CFOs, and others within the outside counsel organization. CLOC stands for Corporate Legal Operations Consortium. The next slide is a basic list of who belongs. The legal operations role is new in the industry, and it is changing the industry in the sense that by the purchase and tracking of outside counsel spend is being centralized into this function. So these companies get together, and the one on the West Coast, the group on the West Coast, get together every other month in person to share best practices. The next slide is a continuation of CLOC. So CLOC started, actually there are 5 big organizations with 5 big CLOC organizations in the country, one on the East Coast, one in Chicago, one in Houston, and 2 in California, one in North and one in Southern California. The ACC has recently agreed to throw an umbrella over all of those organizations so that we don't reinvent the wheel, so that we leverage each other's learnings and that we start to collaborate in a very different way. So a new operations section was created about 2 months ago, and the first conference will be held in June of this year in Chicago. ILTA will be a part of that operations conference. And then, as I mentioned before, CIOs, we have a CIO CLOC organization, and that is CIOs from outside counsel, and operations directors from in-house have been speaking. And some of the things that we've been talking about are standardization of engagement letters, and also the potential of consortium buying. So I think the big takeaways are in-house is being run differently than it was even a couple of years ago. Technology is infiltrating the department. We're not only working within a larger ecosystem in the industry at large, but we're working with a larger ecosystem internally. The use of metrics, analytics, benchmarking information, and dashboards is on the increase, and new associations that are also changing the way that we do business are starting to grow in popularity and in number. And with that, I will turn it over or open it up for questions.
So, Connie, thank you very much, and Michael, thank you very much as well. And we're going to open this up to a couple other panelists as well. And I'm just pulling up my agenda here. So we're gonna also open this up to Dan Baker, who's the Senior Operations Lead at LinkedIn, as well as Vince Cordo, Global Director of Client Value at Reed Smith, Peter Secor, who's the Director of Strategic Pricing and Project Management at Pepper Hamilton, and Michael Horowitz, who is the he was the CFO at Venable for 27 years, and now he is the Chief Practice Management Officer. So, one thing to sort of piggyback on what you were saying, Connie, is just this last week I was at a meeting with a large law firm whose name I won't mention unless they tell me I can, with one of their large clients, and it was a person in the pricing role at the law firm and a person in the operations role at the legal department. And what was so interesting for me to see was that the law firm was explaining to the client, to the operations person, why metrics were so important and why visibility and information and working together, why these concepts would be so important for the client's business. And it dawned on me that this person was talking to the legal operations person because in order to, at least from my perspective, in order to create change within the law firm, he needed the client to sort of come along as well. And this symbiotic relationship between the operations within the client and the operations in the law firm was very interesting to me. And it's why hopefully, we could see both sides of the coin here and start to talk about what each side needs in order to create the change that NetApp and some others have been able to achieve. So I guess my first question is for you, Connie. How do law firms sort of react to these initiatives of NetApps? Do they jump on board easily? Are there different sort of silos within the firms? What do you see in terms of the landscape there?
So we see a complete range in responses. It can be from either, well, it's not a complete range. I can't really say I've seen sheer delight, but I have seen a very deep interest because we have an ability, in-house counsel now has an ability to get and gather metrics and share these metrics that outside counsel have not been able to get their hands on. Benchmarking numbers are also useful for us internally and as an industry. So those things are interesting. This movement has been going on for so long that a lot of times the information that is shared, the analytics that are shared, are discounted because we have been talking about a shift for so long and nothing has happened, not much has happened. However, in the last couple of years, there has been a paradigm shift. So the numbers that we're getting, the access to data, the change in expectations on how we function as a legal department are requiring that we manage our businesses differently. And so we're starting to see some interest from outside counsel in partnering in a very different way.
And I'm gonna direct this to Dan Baker because we were having a conversation. Dan and I were having a conversation this weekend. And by the way, anybody could jump in at any time, but this is a perfect segue to Dan. I'm curious. Something that I never noticed until very recently was the dynamic between the legal ops people, and I hope that that's a fair categorization, and the in-house attorneys, because one might think that it's, law firms versus legal departments. But Dan, what types of initiatives do you see as driven by legal operations? And what's the dynamic between in-house attorneys and legal operations? And is that a piece that, we haven't been paying close enough attention to possibly?
The quick answer to, hi, Dan Baker from LinkedIn. The quick answer to the latter question is yes. It should be paid attention to more. How that occurs, that's a different question. But to affect change, to have real change management as part of legal operations, oftentimes legal operations isn't able to do that on, by itself. If we say, hey, let's use Viewabill as an example, our attorneys will say, well, why? And what do I have to do? What change and action do I have? How hard is this going to be? They have all the kinds of questions that can end up being blockers, actually. So having them on board is super important. Anyways, when you talk about the kinds of things that legal operations drive, I think right here, and we're not really talking about knowledge management, well, other than metrics, of course, but or other things that legal operations drive, HR or our other program management. the things that we're focusing on are outside counsel management, vendor management, financial management. That's really what applies here. And at the end of the day, our job is to free our in-house attorneys from most financial and non-managerial tasks, allowing them to dedicate more time for substantive legal work and client face time. My job is to get them good information so that they can do that, and getting that good information comes from outside counsel. Getting that information from them is key. So empowering our in-house teams is really difficult if we don't have that information from outside counsel. And it's a tricky line to walk.
And and Vince, Vince, you're the strategic, global director of client value for Reed Smith, and it seems to me, and I could be wrong, but sort of the realization I had recently was that your role is similar on the firm side as somebody like Dan's on the, quote, client side. Can you describe sort of the reciprocal dynamic that you guys see within the law firm, and is it the same type of perspective that you have within the law firm as legal ops has within the legal department, would you say?
Yeah, the law firm departments now are connecting more and more with clients, point people, and depending on the culture of the law firm, like mine encourages that communication dialogue. They're not intimidated by it. They promote it. So we collaborate with clients on a daily basis, and coordinate responses on what things and metrics they're looking for. So everything that was showed earlier by the NetApp scorecard, for example, we work with clients on that hand in hand, and clients are really receptive to it because they're not seeing that in all the marketplace yet. But they're pushing for it, and it's good for us. So we're helping build those models hand in hand with the clients.
And what would you say is the client's role in building those models, those metrics, etc.?
They're integral. Clients have items in their side that they need to review, but the firm has others that we need to monitor as well. So it's got to be together. Otherwise, the metrics aren't going to add up. They need to be consistent. So clients can really drive across all firms what models they're looking for so that they can see universally where they're at scorecard-wise across all the firms they're doing business with, rather than each firm giving them their own ideas on what to measure.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna loop Peter in here as well. Peter, at Viewabill we talk about pre-bill insight, right, and real time, because from our perspective, that communication, that conversation is sort of the impetus or the foundation for the types of things that Connie, Dan, and Vince have been talking about. What types of opportunities do you see that can be leveraged using sort of, let's just call it real-time communication? We're not talking necessarily about billing information, but just that real-time communication. I'm going to leave this as broad as possible, but what types of opportunities?
I have an agreement with everybody else in regards to the fact of a shared management approach, and I think that's key to it. And I had the opportunity late this week to actually be meeting with some procurement people and counterparts to myself on the legal side. And it was interesting to me to kind of talk a little bit about this idea of getting information to people early and having them be able to view it. And there were a couple folks who were like, no, that you as a law firm, you gave us a number, that's your responsibility, not our responsibility. But I think if we're really approaching this in a shared mechanism, that seeing things early can let you see is somebody working on this that you weren't expecting, or is somebody working more on a particular part of something or a particular matter that you weren't expecting? And I think that's a real key component to this, to get on it early and quickly.
And is that, I guess, in the older days, when it was lawyers sort of driving the relationships, and there were not these sort of business functions. Actually, I'm gonna take a step back, and I'm gonna ask Michael. So Michael, you were CFO for 27 years, and recently you moved to Chief Practice Management Officer. What does that role mean? And is it a new type of role? And what's the purpose? What's the goal from your perspective? And then I'm going to come back to the question that I was about to ask. Do we have Michael? Hold on. Oh, I'm sorry. Unmute you.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. Thanks, Robbie. I appreciate it. I think that the firm's insight was it wanted a business partner with the division chairs and practice group leaders and the practitioners themselves to partner with the lawyers and their clients so that we can accomplish the objectives that you articulate. That is, to be transparent so that we can share information, as Vince indicated, from a business perspective. Our mission from practice management standpoint is to try to help the practitioners grow revenue, to maintain and improve their operating margins, and to be more efficient and effective in terms of their solutions and really understand their clients' businesses more effectively. By so doing, by putting someone inside and our team inside, partnering with the lawyers directly in how they service their clients, and to share directly with clients our observations, and obviously we're looking at things from different perspectives, gives both of us the same goals and objectives to try to gain efficiency, to know where we sit and what objectives we want to attain in terms of profitability, so that we can establish a long-term partnership in the best fashion possible. And that is different client by client, and our clients really respect that.
So, Michael, this is Connie. What I just heard is that really the primary focus is on profitability, and this is where I think we have a disconnect. Some of the QBRs, or the partner reviews that we're holding, we will come to the table with massive amounts of data, benchmarking data, data out of our e-billing systems, data as it relates to staffing, and we have in the past gotten very little input from outside counsel in terms of metrics and analytics. Do you think that we are simply aiming at different targets?
Not at all. I think that our topics have to be aligned. For a law firm to be successful going forward, they need to understand the business model of their clients, and their clients need to understand their business model, and they have to embrace it. Profitability is a two-way street. I think, one of the things in working with some of our clients is the fact that they have to deal with internal budget managers, corporate executives. In many instances, it's viewed as, a cost burden. What they have to view is the value of the services that we're providing in the context of an overall business strategy. In other words, it can enhance that type of strategy. So one example that I used with Robbie when our last conversation was that we we're doing a significant amount of patent prosecution work for a large pharma company. And we partner with that firm to budget for each matter that we do for them. And we do over 1,000 matters a year in the patent prosecution side with them. We establish budgets, we explain those budgets, and then if there are any deviations, we have to explain the variance if we need to increase the budget and have to justify it. We're working with the GC on the IP side, who reports directly into the top GC and the corporate officers, including the CFO and the CEO. In that sense, we're sharing that risk with them. And it's the value that they're enhancing their intellectual property with in case they want to sell a unit, or they want to sell certain drugs or medical devices or whatever they happen to be doing. We have to understand their business, and they have to understand ours, and what our margins are in that regard. And if we have a partnership in that regard, we're helping each other's line. They don't have to know exactly what our bottom line is as a business. We have to set targets that we believe are correct in terms of what we achieve, and they have to set targets. And obviously, they're not going to share everything along their product lines. But to the extent we establish guidelines, we're working in a partnership together to further each other's value.
So we're getting into a era where there is some concern about the profit margin on the outside counsel side, and so we're starting to look at bidding work. How is that impacting your side of the business?
Well,
and let me just preface it by the only way you even get a ticket to bid on work or participate is that you have to deliver a top quality service every time. So that's kind of a given.
But of course, I mean, it depends on your individual philosophy. Ours is a value proposition, which is the highest quality for the best value. And so we've established, I mean, we've been working for this client for a number of years. We've established what, while there are differences in terms, in the example that I cited, matter by matter, and in fact the client has group matters together, they're relying on us, and they're reviewing our output to help them budget their work. And we have an incentive to hit those targets, and because if we don't, we're not necessarily going to get an increase. We're able to benchmark over a number of matters, and so based on setting our targets, which they have, we've explained to them what our value proposition is in terms of doing that and what the incentives are. We've given them mutual incentives with us to try to achieve our goals. So it's not a matter of, you know, and I should add that in this series of matters, as I said, we're giving them budgets. They're all flat fee budgets. So, you know, based on the type of work that's entailed, it's pretty much known. And
okay,
in some cases, in some cases there's greater complexity. In those cases, we modify, you know, the approach and explain that in advance.
Yep, I get it. So it's really interesting to me that you didn't mention fixed fees until well into this discussion, and that is a big, from the side of the in-house counsel, that is a big plus. So I think part of the conversation between inside counsel and outside counsel is understanding how each other's language almost.
Peter, I'd just like to step back for 1 second. When I started in legal in '99, I was amazed at the revenues the firms were generating, and I couldn't understand why they didn't have some of the systems in place to really kind of do a better job of monitoring and KPIs and things of that nature. And I asked a friend who worked at IBM, whose wife was a lawyer, and he says, well, that's not what they place their value in. And that's understandable. But I think the legal has come quite a long way on both sides, in-house and outside counsel, and being much more proactive in understanding that, and not only that, but looking at on the upfront side. And as far as what you're just mentioning, you're absolutely right. It's not just a matter of flat or fixed fees, but it's really a matter of tying more of the successes and the results to the fees. And I think that is a huge part of helping both in-house and outside counsel come up with better alternative arrangements that really match the needs of the corporation. And then lastly, I just wanted to point out on the partner profits, let's not forget, there's an earnings component and there's a profits component. I think that when you have the discussion with clients, I think that needs to be clear that we're not just really talking about profits. These people work, in some cases, tremendous hours to accomplish where they're at and to get the results for their clients. And I think that's a key element that we can't bypass just looking at the numbers. There's got to be that more objective look at that of saying, what value was truly brought from the results that were gained.
I totally agree with that, and I also think that you need to put some numbers behind that. So in-house counsel, on an average, are paid a third less than outside counsel. Right, so there has to be some kind of, that needs to be an element in many of the decisions that are made when you're deciding what kind of work, when to send it, and where it goes.
Definitely, it's a total level of expertise and who's right situated to do that. But don't forget too that if you're saying 1/3 less, those people actually own part of a business and have put capital, et cetera, into it. So I just think that you're absolutely right, but we've got to consider both sides of that equation.
Let me ask you guys this, and then we should move to the next. Although this is great, but we should move to the next subject. Before an engagement starts between a firm and a client, how often and what are the conversations like between the two sides of the coin that we have here? Connie and Dan, would you be having these conversations with Peter, Michael, Vince, or is it happening through lawyers and relationship partners?
That's a great question. They happen in-house. And I want to say this in a non-sort of pointed way. They'll happen in-house, which will then spur, us meeting with outside counsel as well. But, we too have, 1,000 matters open, let's say, for patent prosecution. And the concept of spending to budget, I don't quite grasp. And what I mean is that our in-house counsel, along with outside counsel, will come up with a budget, and it will be fixed fees, sure, for myriad types of non-provisional or provisional patents, let's say, and all the different buckets within their office actions or who knows continuations. But I don't think they completely. I don't think it's not that they don't, but they don't have the individuals in place to oversee it correctly. I don't think they completely understand the billing that is inside that makes up those budgets, the paralegal time, all the different types of line item narratives that are outside of those fixed fees, in fact. And so we talk, yeah.
No, sorry, sorry, go ahead, Dan.
So there's the budget itself, it seems to be something that we don't have the metrics behind truly to understand what they should be.
Well, if I can rebut, this particular client has someone on the administrative side who monitors that, and there's a team, but there's a lead person who does look at this from all their legal service providers. This is a large company, and they're sophisticated enough in-house, and in the IP area, they have a person who monitors this, and their GC on the IP side is incredibly savvy from a business standpoint. So he's amazingly, I'm not saying that there aren't others, but one of the most astute business people who is also technically knowledgeable that I've ever had the privilege of meeting and working with. So therefore, I think that there's a level of sophistication there where they do understand that. They're dealing with large portfolios. They have a budget assigned, and they know what they have to meet. They basically give us guidance in terms of what they have. We do have times when the level of complexity is greater. If there are outside costs, if we have to bring in a foreign firm to do filings, those are billed directly to them, and they have established relationships, although we go through, we agree on which firms to use in each particular country. But there's a lot of thought that goes in there, and that's why they're able to manage their budget so well.
This is Peter. Kind of a different approach to some of that, or similar, is really understanding the components and the pieces of litigation. Whether that starts from the in-house's knowledge of how long the case is going to last, or their expectation of that, what the deponent side is going to look like, what the doc review side is going to look like, and then working with the firm to really establish those, and then really measure against what's happening in the case. And that's one of the approaches we've been using that really start with not even looking at the numbers on it. What do we need to do in this case to have the success and what the client wants in the end? And how do we recommend that? Now let's turn around based on those items and those efforts and figure out what the right pricing is that going to be and how we're going to risk share that.
And Peter, that is a perfect segue to our next topic, which is, what types of metrics firms, clients can be using, and what's good, what's bad, what should people be looking at. So thank you. This was great. These topics and these subjects are going to come up throughout the other topics as well. But to keep things moving forward and to dive a little bit deeper into the metrics, let's move to our next section, which we call Measuring Up. And I'm going to hand it over to Ken Grady, who's CEO of Safer Lean Consulting. And he's going to speak with Vince Cordo, Casey Flaherty from Kia Motors, Rick Howell, the Director of Financial Systems at Perkins Coie, and Michael Horwitz. Thank you, guys. I'm going to mute myself and put these guys up. And by the way, I see that there are some questions. We're going to try to address those as we are able to. But thank you, guys. This has been helpful and extremely informative, and the conversation is great. Thank you.
So this is Ken Grady. Hopefully everyone can hear me at this point. What I'd like to do, as Robbie said, is sort of tee off of the last comment we heard, because we've been talking about metrics, a fascinating topic and something that when I started many years ago you never heard anybody mention, but today seems to be on everybody's list of things to talk about. We've been talking about metrics in a way that is a little bit unique to the legal industry, at least in my experience, compared to what you see in other areas of a corporation, for example. And our metrics in the legal industry right now tend to weight heavily in favor of talking about costs. Not exclusively, and there's certainly some interesting work being done outside of that, but they still tend to weight very heavily towards that cost side of the discussion. Whereas when I was in operations management, for example, cost, we talked about our internal costs certainly, but an external cost with parties was something you talked about at the time you established the relationship. And then after that, the metrics that you focused on were really operational metrics. They were metrics tied to business objectives, but not really on the cost side. And so one of the themes I'd like to explore as we go through these questions with the various participants is how we're using metrics in a broader way to not simply be descriptive, talking about what happened in the past, how much it cost, or looking to those type of factors, but also looking in a more predictive, forward-looking way. What can we do to change behavior based on what we're seeing? And even a prescriptive way, is there a way that we can use these metrics to now really look out into the future and change the future and determine how things will happen rather than just trying to tweak the model of how we see them happening. So it's a little bit deeper dive into the topic of metrics. And the first thing that I think is interesting, if you go back 20, 30 years, metrics were talked about, but there really weren't a lot of common metrics across the industry. The ones that you tended to see were ones people could readily get to. How many lawyers per paralegal, how many paralegals per secretary, and so on, and some basic compensation metrics, etc. Today, we're a little bit in the wild west of metrics. So one thing I think we can start with is when we talk about metrics, what are the key metrics that people are looking at in their organizations? So I'll throw this out to the group, and Casey, maybe you can start off. Are there key metrics today that you're looking at that really are the ones, 2, 3, or 4 metrics that are really important to you to keep a tight eye on?
Well, so yes and no. There are definitely metrics that I'm looking at all the time, but I have to agree with the Wild West statement, is that I don't find any kind of uniformity, and not just from organization to organization, but even within organizations. You have different people in the organization looking at different metrics, to the extent they're looking at metrics at all. And there are a lot of in-house lawyers, and I'm sure outside counsel, who don't look at metrics. They're worried about the work, the motion, and the metric is whether the deal gets done, the motion gets filed, whether the motion gets granted, and that's it. And that's actually a really interesting area of metrics. If you look at, for example, what Lex Machina is doing in the patent space, using data to drive decisions. But I think that's far less widespread than cost metrics, and those tend to be the ones I look at, though hopefully in conjunction with value. So, for example, I did a document assembly project within Kia, and I focused on turnaround time as well as time between the request and execution, and I'll explain why those aren't the same things, and outside counsel cost. I shrunk turnaround time by 60% and outside counsel cost by 95%. And that's because there was a lot of self-serve on the business side. Just like Connie's instant NDA, the ability for the business people to do work on their own drove a lot of the savings, eliminated a lot of the waste, but it also moved things along much quicker because we added e-signatures to it. And that's the difference between turnaround time and time between request and execution, is our agreements tend to go outside to a lot of different parties, and we used to FedEx them all over the place. And you could have a contract done, but it would be weeks and weeks before it was signed. And there's certainly a cost to that, but it's more about moving the business along and increasing the velocity of the business. So because I was focused on that project, those were my metrics. But no one else in the organization was looking at those metrics at all. I, of course, have created what I called the legal tech audit, where I went and looked at my outside counsel and measured them on things like knowledge management, document assembly, technology utilization. And again, that's about cost, but it's also about quality. I don't want my lawyers wasting their time on drudgery. I want them doing the things where they really add value. And I can't necessarily tell them how to add more value, how to be better experts, but I am pretty good at identifying waste and where they're wasting their valuable efforts. There's a few others I look at, but we only have 30 minutes, and I want to give other people a chance to speak.
So you're looking at a number of business metrics, and those business metrics tie to desirables within the business, a shorter period, faster turnaround, those types of ideas. So let's go to the law firms now and talk a little bit from the law firm side. You obviously have time, rate, cost type metrics. Are you tying these metrics, this information you have, to anything substantive, not a financial, how much revenue we generate or how much profit we're making, but time it takes to complete tasks or anything from a business of delivering legal services side within the firm? Have you identified anything that you're sort of relating the cost to the legal service delivery time on the law firm side?
This is Vince. I know my friend, we have a couple friends online here, but from a law firm perspective, there's a lot of them. So traditionally, law firms, it's interesting, the law firm metrics are similar to client metrics, but they need to be reported differently. So there's different aspects of a metric that I care about that are important to me, and there's other components of those metrics that a client weights as a more important metric to view. So for example, realization on the law firm side is important, and that's really with how much time is actually being billed and collected. So there's a turn, for example. So if a person is working on a specific task, is 100% of that task going to actually be billed and collected upon? So that'd be a turn, for example. And that could equate to a couple things. I know what Casey was just speaking about is quality. It's huge. So a big aspect of making sure your turn rate is high is that a client views that as acceptable quality that they will pay for. So hourly rate aside, they want to make sure that they're happy with what they're being charged. So that goes with, in order to get good assessment on turn, you need to do task-based billing to a degree to ensure that you're managing these phases of a matter properly and that you're reporting on them. So setting up the right budgets in place to ensure that each item has a task code associated to it is important. Now you have the ABA task codes that are out there, but you also have UTBMS task codes, which is more universal and for the global businesses out there. But I'm seeing clients more and more saying, you know what, we're going to create our own set of custom codes that might reverse map to these ABA codes out there. Because going back to the NetApp discussion earlier, it's important to say, what's important to them internally and how do you scorecard firms. So the best way to do that is to create their own gold standard, if you will, and that if you want to be a law firm that does business with them, you have to adhere to those service level requirements. So those are some examples. The biggest example for a firm, which is why we lever Viewabill so much, is missing time. And a missing time component on those task codes is to ensure that people are putting their time in as real time as they can before it's billed, so that you can project manage the chaos, if you will, and throughout the steps of a matter. And this is transactional and litigation, so both sides should be managed this way. So with the missing time ratio, that's a key performance index that we track internally. Now it's good for a law firm because it invokes higher profitability, because there's statistics that show more accurate time entry is less of a turn, which means less of a write-off, so higher turn rather on your time entered. So that's a huge component to stay focused on a law firm. Now, a client side, it's good for them to see your average missing time, because a client then can see that the real-time billing assessments that they're looking at is more accurate, and also that their quality is at a higher level of quality, if you will, because people are entering things in a more accurate manner as they come in, rather than waiting to the end of the month to put time in for tasks that maybe happened several weeks ago. It's it's that kind of level of granularity clients are seeking. So that's an example of a KPI that clients care about different aspects of it, but it's just as important. So to lever that from a law firm perspective as a client is important. Now, when a client's looking at it as a portfolio, a client would like to see all law firms to say, okay, missing time is my standard. I want to see, how all the firms are scorecarded. So again, looking at that great presentation that NetApp showed earlier, that's an example where you could say, out of these 5 firms, all of them are pristine with time, or 3 are pristine with time, 2 not so much. They need to work a little bit. So when they do that, every 2 years or every 3 years, or some firms every year, some clients every year rather, reassessment of firms who they're doing business with, that's something you can go back to the firm on and say, well, here's another element we need you to improve on, or you're doing exceptionally well. Here's some other areas maybe you can help us with. So those are just some examples. There's lots of them, but those are just some crisp examples. Keeping in mind we have 30 minutes left, but there's lots more. But those are I feel very good, crisp ones that you can really be hard to debate why they wouldn't be useful.
And Rick, I was going to say, Rick, at Perkins Coie, are you using the similar types of metrics, or do you have other unique ones that you feel are particularly valuable?
Yeah, around production time hygiene is, to add on to what Vince has said, is probably one of the key issues that we've begun looking at recently. The metrics are very much the Wild West. We feel that here. We have, for so many years, looked at data internally and how it drives profits per partner, that it's been difficult to change the conversation to look at metrics through the client lens. And that's really how we approach things now as we start these new engagements. Is, while we may be traditionally monitoring or on track for what it looks like a successful engagement, the client view of that may not tell the same story. Time hygiene, what we call time lag or missing time, they all kind of come together as a big component of that for us. Tools like Viewabill also expose that to the client. But we measure, particularly we see as this time leak occurs, or the age of time between when it's worked and when it's billed, the write-off levels start to go up after particular key points in time. And they're not very long. Once you're out more than 7 or 8 days, the potential for a write-off goes up. So that velocity of getting time in, as well as some of the billing velocity, is another key aspect we look at that ties into this time lag to make sure that our time worked isn't crossing billing cycles. One of the things that, or one of the metrics that we've seen become more relevant recently, particularly as we're trying to strengthen that business arm of the operations, independent of the services, is that this crossing billing cycles becomes problematic for budgeting on the council side. So we need to be able to be particularly aware that the more often that we have time results or cost results that are crossing these periods, the more likely we're going to have disputes or issues with the client. And it goes to this quality of service. They need to be able to meet their budget. When applicable, and those clients work with us, and we find that happens more often now than it used to in the past, and they'll share those metrics with us, we try and build those into the dashboards that come around, both with if it's going to be an alternative fee or a budgeted type of engagement. And I do believe that every key client should have a budget applied to it, whether or not it comes from the client or not, just so that you can track your performance against those. And then beginning to look at what those clients are looking at. So some of our clients, we have FTE utilization ratios that we look at, where the clients want to make sure that they're not seeing a lot of turnover among the FTEs that are doing business for them. So in those cases, we want to make sure not only is the leverage ratio correct on a particular engagement for a phase or a task, but that the resources assigned to it are maintaining some consistency, so that when we might look at it as, hey, these 15 people have worked on this matter, and that was very profitable for us because we served it out across these different associates. But the client may want to say that we only were expecting 3 people of an FTE value to work on that. We wanted the same 3 people that had worked on this previous matter or this previous phase and task. So that time lag, the FTE utilization, and billing velocity are 3 key ones that we see a lot more focus on, and they do impact. When we let these slide, we find more disputes with the clients. We're spending more time in collections with our days in inventory for those types of values, and they tend to be a percentage of write-off or write-down for values for work product that falls in those categories or outside those boundaries.
So then one of the things that I think we all agree on is we're in this Wild West world. And I guess, Dan or Robbie, we have another participant in the call who had some thoughts on standardization. Hello?
Sorry.
Jane? Is Jane Bennett there?
Yes, this is Jane. Sorry.
I believe Robbie thought that you might have. Go ahead, Robbie.
I thought maybe you would want to jump in here. I just wanted to give you the opportunity if you did want to. So Jane, just so everybody knows, Jane is the president of the Leads Oversight Committee. And she had a question earlier, and I thought maybe this is a good place to give you an opportunity if you would like to.
Okay, can you hear me, Robbie?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so I was president of the Leads Oversight Committee for 8 years, and obviously standardization within the codes is it's very important to law firms for them to try and keep these code sets that are mandated for use by their client straight. You know, it involves quite a bit of time to get things entered properly within their system so that they can record things correctly. One of the speakers earlier mentioned that typically stuff is recorded using an internal code and then mapped to the client's code set. And we see that happen very often. It's probably more the norm as opposed to from matter to matter just using the client's codes. And that's to facilitate the law firm's internal ability to look at the work being performed on a one-for-one basis.
Well, can I just interject on that point? This is
Go ahead.
That's actually not the case from what I've seen. It might be the case for some firms. Firms are stuck with using those codes because of e-billing structures that are warranted by the client guidelines. Firms really can care less about which codes to use. In fact, most of the codes aren't even used properly because there's so many of them. So for instance, ABA codes are litigation heavy, not transactional. So to your point, it's a good point. My point is a firm should never tell a client, use our codes. Clients now, we're seeing, clients are saying, you know, even our e-billing system's still set up to only read these ABA codes. We don't even want those changed yet. We just want you to map them for us so we could still get more details on these other custom codes for transactional or for whatever reason. I just wanted to highlight that because not all firms, the firms I've seen, I've had this more as the obstacle, not so much that we were dictating saying we must use these ABA codes because they're really irrelevant to us. We can gauge our effectiveness and efficiencies using different methods. We're not as heavily reliant on which codes are used. Just to clarify.
Okay, and actually I agree with what you're saying. I was going in a slightly different direction with this. Because the law firm are using their own codes and they're mapping to the client's code set, very often the mapping isn't done perhaps with the level of exactness that the client would wish is being associated with it. So I think very often what the client sees in terms of the codes coming across isn't necessarily the complete story. I also think that with a move towards more sharing of analytics from organization to organization to try and figure out what are better ways to manage matters or what are industry norms, by using more similar codes then as opposed to everybody going in their own direction with the codes, that I think is going to be something that guides more uniformity in terms of code usage off into the future.
So one of the challenges that seems to be coming up is, we have this data that we're trying to categorize in a number of different ways. Clients may prefer certain codes. The law firm may be using certain standardized code systems and then have a number of different clients using a number of different codes. And so there's a lot of attempts to categorize the data in a variety of different ways. So let me ask the question from a slightly different perspective, and that is, are there, or would it be beneficial to both the companies and to the firms to have metrics that would be somewhat standard metrics you could look at across industries and within industries across companies, so that rather than going at it from the code standpoint, you're trying to get information alone, you're trying to get information so that you have some standardized group of metrics that would help you on a relative basis, company A to company B, industry A to industry B, evaluate performance or efficiency, and those types of questions. Is that, as I said at the outset, we used to have some of that, though it wasn't particularly helpful, and it was pretty coarse because we didn't really have data to do much more. But would it be helpful, and assuming technology is not a barrier, would it be helpful to have some standardized metrics to use, and then be able to have a NetApp talk to a LinkedIn, talk to a Kia Motors, and have this common understanding of what the metrics are? And I'll let whoever would like to answer that first go ahead.
This is Vince. I put some metrics together. I know some of the folks that are on this panel had been involved in, I'm not trying to plug this next book that's coming out. It's going to sound that way, but
go ahead, shameless plug.
Through Buying Legal, but my chapter, in fact, was to take a stab at saying, look, we need to create some standard metrics. So, for example, one of them was a net margin example, where a law firm has a net margin template where we understand what our potential profit should be in specific matters, but a client should do shadow matters to assume to concretely say with their existing staff what it would take them to do it if they were to do the matter on their own, and then what it's worth when they put things out to bid rather than just having bidding wars. Using that as an example, there's a lot of metrics that are subjective.
Let me ask you a question on that one. So you have a net margin for a firm, you have a net margin if you were to handle it internally, and are you trying to get a little bit to the one of the points that was raised earlier about value? There's going to be a different net margin for each, and trying to help clients identify here is the additional value that the firm brings at a cost of X?
Correct. Also, what it should potentially cost, because right now I hear a lot of, like most of my counterparts, we'll hear folks say, well, this is what it should cost on the client side, and the question is, well, how do you know that? And if you're not tracking the way law firms are tracking on a code base and developing budget plans, or having firms do that, how do you truly know it? It's a bit subjective, and granted, if you're doing it for 30, 40 years, you've seen X amount of hundreds of matters, I get that. But it's almost like the same argument law firms had years ago, where law firms can't say that anymore, to say, look, we've done this for 100+ years. We know this is around what it's going to cost. People want more statistics. So my point is, I took a stab at creating some metrics. What was noted earlier in the question, which is which I've always stated, is we're in an industry where we don't have accounting standards, principles rather, on these types of metrics that we're trying to score. So it would be great to try to put together a list of standard codes and the like. And that was what I tried to do with there's about 15 metrics as a starting point, so that, for instance, each law firm cares about time entry and turn. We all call it different things, but to say, all right, we all agree to call it missing time or whatever the client base is caring about, but then have that evolve and have it grow and say, well, maybe for an M&A transaction, we notice there's trend on due diligence with high write-offs from all clients, because in due diligence, it's pretty subjective with quality grading. How can we all improve on the client side and on the law firm side so that we can get better at having those hiccups on due diligence for M&A? work. So it's those types of things where I don't think it'll ever end with the metric side. Now on the code side, I know the ABA has tried that for years to standardize codes. I think that's a bigger thing to tackle because you need a lot of people to agree and sign off. Years ago, I was naive thinking that I can help push that and make that happen from a firm perspective, but it really isn't going to be firm-driven. That's client side. So rather than a client have to wait for the industry to standardize, we're seeing a lot of clients saying, you know, we have a good team, smart team. We're going to standardize their own gold standard of codes, and firms want to do business, they'll adhere to that. And then maybe with the groups that were highlighted earlier in the presentations coming out there, working with ACC, maybe they'll help make that change. But I look forward to that because it'll help make our statistical reporting be better and more competitive in certain RFP scenarios.
This is Casey. Let me speak to that. I also contributed to buying legal, but I think the key is the groups, and Connie underplayed just what a pivotal role she's played in not only founding CLOC, but bringing all the various groups together and working with the ACC. And I have high hopes that group is going to be able to do a lot in this realm. For example, I'm on a task force that's headed up by Mike Haven, who we heard from earlier, on billing guidelines, where we are putting together billing guidelines from all sorts of clients across the spectrum to rationalize them and to create some kind of guide, but also hopefully move in a positive direction in terms of standardizing metrics, standardizing the types of data that clients are asking for from their firms. But that's only the start of it. Clients, of course, need to look at a lot of other data internally that has nothing to do with their firms. And the scary thing is there's a great webcomic called XKCD, and they have one where someone's sitting there and complaining about something, saying, look at this, there are 14 different standards that apply to X. We need to come up with one universal standard. And then you see him working on it. And then 2 months later, you see someone sitting there complaining, there are 15 different standards that apply to X. And it's really about avoiding that and coming up with something that is universal. And as Vince said, it's going to have to be client-driven ultimately, and that means lots of clients coming together. And this legal ops section of the ACC that Connie's really been the driving force behind, I think is the best opportunity we've ever had to do that.
Do you see that we would be able to reach a world where the metrics will be ones that give you this relative view? One of the things that GCs always seem to ask is, how am I doing compared to A, the other players in my industry, or B, other companies generally, because they feel that there's great value in knowing this is the ratio of what I do compared to, as I say, others in my industry, so am I being efficient or not, and others outside my industry. Now, this same debate has gone on in compensation for a long time for public companies, because in the compensation world, people have always tried to figure out, is this CEO being paid high or low compared to peers in the industry and compared to other outside the industry? And in that compensation setting, no one's being able to solve the puzzle yet, and so the debate goes on. Do you think we will have better success in the legal industry, or that we're better off having metrics that you can just focus on from an absolute basis? This is what I did last year, I'm doing better this year, I expect to do better next year, and not worry so much about the relative nature.
I think you will have some of that, because you already do. You have industry groups that get together, and they're similarly situated companies that already benchmark against each other. I know of several examples, and a lot of them have happened within those regional groups that Connie mentioned. So I would not be surprised if you got more and more of that at kind of a national and even international level with this new ACC group. There seems to be a real hunger for it. There just hasn't been the organizational infrastructure to facilitate it, nor have there been the individuals. The rise internally of people like Connie and Mike and Daniel Baker at LinkedIn, of non-lawyer legal professionals. And it doesn't mean they aren't lawyers. Many of the people I mentioned are. But their day-to-day focus isn't on the direct provision of legal services, but as Connie said, the business of the legal department, running the legal department like a business. They're in a much better position to do those kinds of comparisons and develop those kind of relationships than those who are, in the trenches fighting the IP litigation, trying to get the deal done. And so the rise of those people, and then this infrastructure, this organizational structure that's coming about. I'm not sure if I'm a cynical optimist or an optimistic cynic, because I really do think change is coming, and yet I'm convinced it's going to be a lot slower than it should be. But I do think it's coming, especially now.
Do you, any of you, believe that there are metrics out there that will be the gold standard for a firm and a client to look at this same number, these same numbers, and use those as the primary determinants of performance? Are there ones that you see today or that you think will be these, this is the, the 4 number or 4 metrics or the 6 metrics that you should look at, and a firm and the client are looking at that same number, as opposed to many of the metrics we've talked about, which are either ones that are of internal importance to a firm or ones that are internal importance to the company. They help each of you manage the relationship better, but they aren't that, that one common metric that both of you see and both of you are using to drive things. Are there such metrics out there today, or are there ones that you think should be out there?
I'll pitch myself here. How about the velocity of time entry? Is that, and this is going to help us sort of segue into the next topic as well, but it seems like the velocity that time entry gets drafted is a metric that is equally interesting to both sides of the coin. But I'm curious what you guys think.
Vince or Rick, obviously from the firm side, the velocity of an entry is very important for all the reasons that have already been stated. From a company side, on a transparent billing structure, the velocity of an entry is important because it gives you much more current and real-time data about where things are being handled in the matter. So it's one that does have benefit to both, and it's one that you have visibility to. Do you agree that's a metric that you think we should be using as one of those standard, look at these 4 or 6 data points between the firm and the client?
So it's Rick. We have several clients that we work with that look at that particular metric, and it's very important from us on the productivity side. I don't know if it's enough to say that it's just fees, particularly when you're dealing with budgeting patent type of matters where there's a lot of cost that may be associated on a monthly basis, and the velocity of those costs, that's an area that we still struggle with, of how to maintain the same type of speed of getting costs turned around, especially if you're dealing with third-party type vendors where you're bringing in invoices or assumed costs into the engagement, and then getting that back out to the client effectively so there's no surprises between what might be an estimated cost and what the actual cost is when it hits it. But the fees for sure are something that we are I feel you're going to see a lot of traction with that velocity of how they come in. Time hygiene, again and again, is proven that, in our firm, that the more delay there is, or the more lag there is between the worked and the posted time, the more likelihood that those fees will be scrutinized by a client or potentially rejected.
Have you had any, this may be wild, but have you had any instances where clients will, I guess in common terms, reward or punish you based on the velocity of entry? Obviously, firms do a lot internally to encourage all the fee earners to get their time in promptly, and they have various mechanisms. But have you had an instance yet where a client will say, you know, if you achieve a X% compliance rate with getting the time entries on our matters in, that would entitle you to either an additional payment, or we wouldn't hold back as much?
We haven't had that yet. We are still, what we do see is that clients that are monitoring this or build their own metrics about it are more vocal around the budgeting process and the monthly and projected types of fees. So where we may be projecting a month or two in advance about what we're going to be billing the client. Where we do not have good time hygiene, we have more difficulty with serving the internal legal counsel's needs. And it often comes up between, you know, discussions with a partner then.
And do you see that as a metric that you either tout or get asked for on RFPs? So it's risen to the level of such importance that it's actually now part of the process of obtaining work?
No, it hasn't come up to that level yet.
Yet.
Yes, I do expect that, you know, just like you look at, as you start to unbundle the services, each proposal is going to have to provide some type of incentive about how we're going to provide information to the client, particularly around their budgeted and build. So if we have phased task specific budgets we're going to hit, or fixed fees where they're expecting us to hit a particular amount every month of a budget, that in the next year or two, if clients aren't asking for it, it's something that I would expect that we would be offering as part of the RFP. Is we would have services or third-party services that probably leads to things like the next question around Viewabill, where we would give them some insight into the work in progress so that they could anticipate budget costs.
So do you see that even as a point of differentiation? We have better time hygiene, and that helps us help you?
Yes, that's a very good way of looking at it.
This is Vince, too. I would also just say clients are looking for more ways for people to show their value services. And by highlighting that you're assessing these items, it shows more than just, for instance, the response. It shows that the culture of the firm is promoting administrative collaboration with partners on overlooking matter health as real time as they can, and reporting on those metrics with clients. So it's almost more about, in most cases, who do you got to, you know, in an RFP question, who do you have that support the attorneys and that will make the client's life easier by reporting on things as though there was a mini entity dedicated just to that key account on helping report on budget updates to make the client's life easier.
So you've got an higher attention level to the administrative yet very important aspects of the service delivery process, not just the substantive, the legal aspects of the service delivery process, but you're elevating that administrative side.
Yeah, but for instance, I wouldn't even call it administrative, because administrative is the law firm way, where it was almost viewed as secondary to the matter. It's more important now. It's just as important as the matter in most cases. Clients are viewing this as just as high as the result. So even labeling it as administrative, I know that wasn't your intention, but it's not even viewed of that way anymore. It's viewed as just as important a driving factor in some cases, because they're looking at exposure as a metric. That's another metric at some point. So it's just as important as the matter, and labeling it as administrative almost takes away from just how high level that clients are viewing its importance.
Yep. And you know, another way of looking at it is we talk about it as if they're the customer relationship manager. In a traditional type of professional services organization outside of legal, you would have people dedicated to the account that may not be the one servicing the legal side. That sort of maturity is what is beginning. I think the seeds are planted here that the legal business is going to become a much broader part of the organization, and that legal business is going to be geared towards managing that client relationship outside the legal services piece at a very professional level.
Yeah, the way I talk about it is we have the substance of law and we have legal service delivery, and legal service delivery was not something we focused heavily on before, and it's now elevated itself to being on a same playing field with substance. So you can't just be good at substance, you have to be good at substance and legal service delivery.
So I want to segue this to the the broader question of transparency, and I've for some reason lost my screen, so I'm no longer controlling, but I think we're okay still. But to open this up as well to Justin Liu, who's the Associate General Counsel, and Karen Sweeney, who's the CIO at Benish, and everybody who's in this conversation could stay on and participate as well. But the delivery of legal services and the method in which it's delivered, especially as we talk about metrics, there is that real-time element, and that real-time element might create some vulnerability, right? And I guess my question for the group and whoever wants to take this is, what's the role of transparency? How can you use real-time transparency to show that sausage making, or how the sausage is made, and what does that mean for the broader relationship? Should some things remain non-transparent? Is transparent even the right word? I know there's a lot of questions, but I want to throw it out to the group and just sort of get an understanding for what does it mean to be transparent in real time.
This is Justin Liu from MGM Resorts, and this is a topic that our legal department has been very focused on because frequently, and more so than in the past even 6 months than in prior years, we have our business folks and our finance folks, and even sometimes members of our board of directors who are asking us how much has a certain matter cost us to date, or what are we spending on this litigation or otherwise, and using transparent legal services, we can run these reports ourselves or identify what those figures are if our outside firms are entering their time in real time. And previously, sometimes we've had to ask our relationship partner, they've had to ask associates to put the time in so that this information could be provided to us. That might take days or even a week. And being able to see this in real time whenever we want through a platform is something that is definitely becoming a higher priority for us. And in the future, we have been asking our internal lawyers to monitor their outside counsel in terms of on a regular basis, whether that's daily or weekly, has been up to them. But certainly, we expect it to be more frequently than monthly, and especially when in the past those monthly bills don't always even include all the time for that month. That's been a problem for being able to monitor matters and meet our budgetary goals.
And Justin or Dan or Michael, whoever really, can you talk about your experience sort of talking with firms about the concept of real-time visibility and how the firms generally, obviously I'm not asking anybody to point at any firms, but just generally, what's the reaction, maybe initially, what's the reaction, over the span of a few weeks?
I'll take that one on. This is Dan from LinkedIn. And I'll preface it with, this information that, with the tech shift, finance is aware that data is available, and this is to what the last gentleman was saying, and therefore they're clamoring for more data. And this is where, when you talk about velocity, it's where we're able to provide that data if it's available. When we reach out to firms, there is a visceral pushback to transparency of that data. I think it's maybe because the reason they don't maybe understand the reason we're asking for it for some aspects. The aspect that we are looking for, someone in my seat is looking for, is simply, accrual information. I'm not looking for, I don't have time to, I don't know anyone who does have time to, frankly, to go through line item information on what's going on in the matter. We're looking for hours and spend. So simple answer is that there has been some pretty heavy pushback, and I think it's the reason it's some sort of indictment of that you want to look into, how we're entering our hours, when we're entering our hours. It's not that at all. The fact is that I see a tool, the concept of Viewabill, as something that's going to help firms get paid more, not less. I don't equate it to necessarily a cost savings. I don't see it as apple to apples. It's some sort of cost savings solution. In fact, if I'm able to get more information, more accrual data, let's say, and I can put that into a forecast, I can then budget for more. I can pay my firms more, not necessarily less. Vendor management is a separate issue as far as any sort of value-based billing. So to answer, pretty heavy pushback. I see Viewabill or a solution like that as a way to get firms paid more because we'll be able to provide more information and be more transparent about it.
And anybody on the firm side, I don't want to point anybody out, but what's your sort of reaction or initial reaction to a client's request for this type of data? What's going through your head, and sort of how does it reverberate throughout the firm?
So this is Rick, and we went through this last year, and the initial is a shock and a feeling of indictment. Are we not doing the work? But that, I think, is just because it's a change, and it didn't take long for us to begin to socialize within the management levels about what really this tool will provide. But a tool like Viewabill, for an organization like ours, where we want the legal operations side to become more visible, and really introducing any type of change in the legal ecosystem, especially when things are going well, is difficult. And from our perspective, our attorneys are very much along the line, for so long, if we've heard about these things for so long, they're never going to happen, to go back to Connie's original point. A tool like Viewabill immediately elevates the legal operations service within the firm. It allows us to start driving behavior and having those conversations internally. There really isn't more than a day or two of pushback from the clients and while they understand, or the client leads while they understand what's happening. And then after that, it opens up a whole new set of avenues that we can pursue with those client teams, particularly around what tools are also available for them to help them manage their matters once they know that there's some transparency with the clients. What resources we have internally around LPM or other types of budgeting that they may not be using that are available to them to help them get on top of it. And it begins to drive down particularly some of the key metrics that we talked about earlier, time lag and that time hygiene. All of the clients that come to us and ask us to install a product like Viewabill, we do see improvements in the overall time hygiene of the attorney teams that go into it. While they may not actively track it, the groups now in operation sides are aware of it, and we spend a lot of time looking at those types of clients that are now we're actively sharing information with to make sure that those types of things around our velocity and our hygiene are within what we think are acceptable parameters for those clients. So for us, it's a great way to start the discussion, help raise the visibility that it's coming within the law firm, and then begin to offer some of the process improvement methods that we have around being more productive around time entry.
And this might be a leading question, but fine, whatever. Does it help create a conversation with different people on the client side? Part of what we've been talking about here, this goes back maybe an hour or so, but is that the operations at within the legal department and the operations, we'll call it, within the law firm, don't always interface with each other. But in tools like these, does that provide an opportunity to create a metric-based or sort of measurable type of relationship with the person on the other side who is responsible for managing the firm, or sorry, the legal department like a business? Is it an opportunity?
Absolutely, and we've seen that. We had an instance where Dan and I had to touch base over something that looked one way in Viewabill, but had been a separate arrangement that was outside of the purview of what was being tracked, but never had to get up to the billing or attorney side. I think it's gotten better. When it first started with Viewabill for us, all the connections were going directly to the partners, and they're not always the most interested in managing that aspect of the relationship. So it's helped to have the legal operations team be more involved in how those requests are initiated, and then we can reach out or at least have a dialogue with the requesting firms to make sure that whatever they're really looking for, we're getting it for them. And maybe it's more than they want out of Viewabill, but it's an opportunity for us to make that contact.
And what's the oh, I lost my train of thought. Sorry. Hold on. I guess do you see these types of metrics, sort of disseminating down to the attorney level, or are we far away from the point in time where lawyers themselves will actually manage their own behavior based on these types of metrics?
That's a good question.
And that's a general question.
And I can only speak for what I see in our environment, and we're not there yet. I think attorney behavior, when we start tying this to profits per partner or compensation-driven decisions, it will be more. They will be more engaged. It really depends on the attorney. Some attorneys are very into the relationship. They understand how important it is and that they actively track it. Other ones, they're waiting for us to come to them and say, your realization is going to be down, and here's why. It's these types of events that have occurred over the last 3 or 4 weeks that you haven't managed.
Mm-hmm. Karen, are you on the line? Do we have Karen?
I am. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. And sorry, since I might
okay.
Something happened. So Karen is the CIO at Benish, and Benish was one of our earliest firms. And I'm wondering, Karen, if you could talk just a little bit about how Benish came to the decision to go with, sort of a cutting-edge technology in terms of, at least in terms of philosophy, right? It's certainly a different way of looking at things. How did you guys come to it, and what has been your experience working with clients in real time, if you will?
You know, when we first heard about Viewabill, which was very, very early on, it really seemed to fit in with several of the initiatives that we had been talking about, project management, budgeting, having more conversations with our clients about billing and time spent before the bill actually goes out, not surprising clients when the bill goes out. So, you know, it was a bit controversial within the firm, but the COO was very much behind it. I personally really love this kind of stuff, so I was very much behind it. And so we decided to, you know, to give it a try. There was definitely some concern from some attorneys in the firm about, you know, sharing this information real time and the accuracy of it, and you know what happens when we do have people that aren't reporting time on time, and things like that. But we started with a couple clients and got very good feedback, and I don't think that it has, we haven't had as much demand for it as I thought that we would, but the clients that are using it are very much engaged, and it helps us with our engagement with them. And a couple other points that were brought up earlier is we do believe that we see that when we have a Viewabill client, people are especially cognizant and aware that they need to get their time in. So that's a good thing for everybody, both us and our clients. And, you know, is a benefit to us as a firm as well as our clients to not surprise our clients with bills that they didn't expect. And in the long term, I think that's a win-win for both sides. So overall, it's been a good experience and very positively, you know, commented on by our clients.
Great. And do you think that there's an opportunity, and this is not meant to be pointed at all, but what's the opportunity for firms to, you know, Vince was saying before that they bring Viewabill to some of their clients. What's that opportunity for firms to show their sort of innovative, their willingness to innovate and look, and possibly make mistakes, right? Sometimes billing data changes throughout the course of the billing cycle, and you know that's life, right? So what's the opportunity for firms to proactively make clients aware of these types of technologies?
Well, we've actually started a little bit of a new process when we take on new clients, and really making sure that someone, and a lot of times it's not the attorney, someone talk to them about the technologies that we can offer. And of course, now Viewabill is part of that. And I think that we weren't getting, you know, we had some attorneys that were very excited about it and really brought it up to any new clients, but that probably wasn't the majority. They just, I think a lot of it is they just don't think about these sort of administrative things a lot of times. So, so we have gone on we have put together this actual questionnaire for our new clients that we walk through with them to talk about some of the things that we can offer. And so the uptake of Viewabill, since we've started that, which is pretty new, has started to expand.
Great. Does anybody else have thoughts? You know, we're starting to run low, and I want to get to the legal tech conversation with Pratik. Anything else anybody wants to add on this topic? I feel awkward asking questions because they're all for my, you know, my own benefit, if you will. So
this is Peter Secord. I'd just like to make the comment that when we first started putting this in and looking at it and put it off to our IT people, they were like, why in the world would you ever give this to a client? And it's just a total education across the firm of helping them understand the value of a product like it.
And you know, what again, this is totally a transparent question. You guys are going to know where I'm coming from. But what can Viewabill do to help make it an easier sale, so to speak, within your firm?
This is the evolution we're going through. I mean, this is changing mindsets of people who've been working in these environments, some of them for 30 years.
Right.
Part of it is the case studies. You know, the more case studies, lawyers love to have case studies, and lawyers love to have examples of where doing something helped improve their practice and helped them, you know, attract new clients, build stronger relationships with existing clients, expand business with clients. And so the more examples that exist out there in the universe that you can share, that others can share about how this accomplishes those goals from a law firm's perspective, the more buy-in you get to any technology or any new thing. The less there's evidence to them that it achieves those types of goals, the more skeptical they are.
And Robbie, this is Mike Haven. Real quick, I think a lot of it is a matter of credibility because, you know, you can sell your product all you want, but until they hear from the client themselves about why the client believes it's a win-win for both sides, they may not be interested. And what we've found is that even a short conversation from the inside team with the firm about what the inside team hopes to accomplish with the tool goes a very long way. So as much as we would love to sit back and say, okay, Viewabill, do all the work and get the firm connected, it never turns out that way. And part of that is because we're still in this socialization phase where the industry is going through a change. But and it'll get easier as time goes on because all of us on this call are blazing new trails here, changing what has been an age-old practice in the industry. And so a short conversation with the inside team going over what I have 3 primary points that I always talk about with our firms about why it's a win-win. Going over those points, they really start to see the light. And then the firms that we've been piloting this tool with over the past year, the ones that we've had for that almost that whole duration, we're really starting to see some cool things happen. Like I got Perkins is one of our firms who's been on this tool with us for a year, and I got a message from our relationship partner over the holiday saying, you know, Mike, due to the holidays, we're going to be a little bit late on our time entry this month. And, you know, I really appreciated that because what it means is they're thinking about it. They're thinking about the benefits to both sides, and they're realizing that these are important things. So, you know, for just taking the billing guideline compliance as one example, you know, when I was a partner in Big Law, my firm had a requirement that we enter time on a daily basis. And at NetApp, we're a bit looser than that with our firms. We require entry within 3 days of doing the work. Well, Viewabill, you know, helps ensure compliance with the guideline, and obviously avoiding delay time is a win-win for everyone because it increases billing accuracy. Firms want to capture all of their time, and clients don't want to be billed for a minute more than was actually required to do the work. So it's important to both sides, and the more time that goes on, the more the firms realize that that's actually a really cool thing for them too. And so it's all about the win-win.
And for a legal department that focuses so much on operating like a business, such as yours, such as NetApp, what's the reaction? And I'm actually curious about this. What's the reaction in your department when a firm, for whatever reason, won't or chooses not to participate in these types of initiatives?
So fortunately, that hasn't happened very much. After we piloted the tool with a few of our top firms, we decided to extend the opportunity to our top 20 firms, and we issued connection requests to all of those top 20. And of the top 20, only 2 said no. And we've had some very difficult conversations with those firms, to say the least, because we don't accept no as an answer. In one case, for example, we told a firm who NetApp had been working with for over 10 years that they no longer appeared to be a good fit because they were refusing to adopt the technology. And they were shocked and started scrambling. And the partners at the firm wanted to adopt the tool, but the CFO was being stubborn. And they knew that so long as they continued to take that position, we would never pay for their services billed on an hourly basis. So the conversation then changed to fixed fees. And we negotiated some very innovative fixed fee agreements with that firm. And so even though the relationship appeared at first to be a casualty, the unintended consequence resulted in a big win. And the relationship now is on the mend and may end up stronger than ever. Time will tell.
Mm-hmm. And obviously there's certain situations, and this is not necessarily about NetApp, but there's always going to be firms who, for whatever reason, you know, are not applicable. You know, let's say you take a one-person law firm, a solo shop. You know, I imagine most large legal departments will have slightly different requirements in terms of, you know, how the activity is delivered with a small firm versus a large sophisticated firm. Is that
absolutely. And also the types of matters, because Viewabill, I know, bills firms based on number of matters. Well, if you're a patent prosecution firm and you have a zillion matters open and you hardly ever work on any of them, it doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of that pricing structure. So depending on the size of the firm and what type of work they do, they may need some special type of agreement, or you know, it may not make sense to do Viewabill with them at all if, for example, they're on flat fees. So so what I found, and this is kudos to you guys at Viewabill, is that Viewabill's been creative and flexible in terms of how those sorts of things are structured when it's necessary to change the typical model.
And you know, I think as a startup in the legal industry, there's always a learning curve. And a lot of you guys on this call have been with us as we have matured and sort of learned our way. I think this is a good opportunity to segue into just what can legal tech do in general. What's the role? What's the future of legal tech? And you know, how do we get more startups, more innovation, etc.? And this is going to be our last presentation. I know we're running a little over time. I am sorry, although the conversation has been great. We're going to hand this off to Pratik, who is the co-founder and vice president of legal business solutions at Elevate. And the panelists, you know, everybody who's talking here could stay on. You know, I don't think we need to switch it up unless we need to add Michael. I think Michael might be muted. But Pratik, I'll hand it off to you. And thank you guys very much.
Great. Thanks, Robbie. You know, the question that I think we'll focus on for this last piece of the webinar really focuses on where do we go moving forward. And, you know, without putting the cart before the horse a little bit, I know that we're only kind of scraping the tip of the iceberg, if you know what I mean, in terms of the innovation. But it also presents something that I can kind of consider to be the innovator's quandary, which is we've been able to now learn a lot about what behaviors typically change with the presence of these types of tools. We've also been able to learn a little bit about what works and what doesn't in terms of what our lawyers are adopting to. So the big question in our minds then becomes, well, where do we go from here? And thinking about the practicality of these solutions and what we think could be practically used by the lawyers at the end of the day, it begs the question of, if we were to pick or think about the things that we would introduce to either the users that are using these tools today, or even going beyond that to possibly thinking about if there were things that we would introduce to the lawyers within the next kind of curve, if you know what I mean, what are the things that we would focus on? And I know that may be different for the law department panelists and the law firm panelists, but why don't I start first with the law department panelists, Casey and Justin. My first question is, based on the reaction that you've gotten from using a tool like this and other transparency tools, what would be on your high list of, if we were to go somewhere from here, keeping in mind that there are a number of solutions that we think kind of play in the puzzle of enhancing that firm-client relationship, where do you think you would actually like to see the technology move? And then where do you think your lawyers would actually see or request that, if we're thinking about transparency, what are the types of things that they would like to see in addition to the things that have already been presented to them in the form of a Viewabill product?
This is Casey. I'm not sure that my lawyers would like to see more in the way of transparency products. I think for the most part, and like most people, they just want to be left alone to do their work. It's, trust me, I work really hard, I'm really smart, I'm really well trained, just let me do my job. To the extent it's transparency, I think that they would like more access to us and knowing what our expectations are. And so tools that facilitate bilateral communication about expectations, I think, are really where we're going. And Viewabill has integrated a lot of that. The pencils down, the send a note, ask a question, so you can do it right there from the interface. And so, to me, that's more about communication than it is transparency. What I would like to see personally, in terms of more transparency, is along the lines of the original vision I had for my legal tech audit was quite comprehensive in terms of the internal practices of the firms. So you take the assumption that your work is going to be done well, that the top-level partner really knows what she's doing, and that at the end of the day, it's going to be quality work product. Okay, now what do we look at? How is the work being handled at levels below that? And that's everything from technology utilization at the lowest level. Do they know how to use Word and Excel? To knowledge management practices, to document management practices, to document assembly. And that visibility into the firms, I think, is really important, because there are so few instances where there is only one qualified firm or one qualified lawyer. But once they're qualified, how do you choose among them? How do you differentiate them? Because all of a sudden, quality has lost much that salience as a metric, and so it's looking at other things. I think Ken Grady made a good distinction about the delivery of the legal services becoming, in many ways, as important as the quality of the services provided, because we're not perfect, but we're pretty good at choosing quality lawyers, because there's a lot of quality lawyers out there.
Yeah, Casey, I mean, you make a very interesting point about, and I think this resonated quite a bit, about just enough information being enough information. And going just really quickly back to the conversation around what metrics matter, I think your statement really resonates with a lot of the folks that we talk to as well, which is we think that transparency is valuable, but the lawyers it sounds like the lawyers in your law department are saying, we like the transparency, we like the idea of transparency. You make it too much information for us to digest, it becomes more of a debate about the weeds versus the value of the actual data that's actually being presented. So that's interesting. Justin, is that kind of what you're seeing on the within your law department as well?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, people don't want to read line-by-line items on a daily basis or anything, or even, to get necessarily like daily reports on like how long a particular bill, was, when a particular line item was entered versus when the time was billed. But really these reports that encapsulate the information in a useful way on an aggregate scale. At the same time, I think there is more room for transparency, into things like how are matters being staffed, why am I getting a particular associate, or why not the attorney or the partner that has been working on my matters in past years. If there's a reason like they're unavailable, et cetera, because of bandwidth, that's fine. But I think, and I'm not sure how the technology facilitates that, but certainly we have those discussions on a regular basis to understand how our law firms are best serving us. One additional idea that I thought but not thought deeply about is making our client files available to us in some accessible way. There are times when, due to turnover internally in our department, we need access to certain files or records or past transactions a firm has done for us, or litigation filings, and we do maintain our own records, but it can be helpful sometimes. There's like version control issues, things that a law firm can share with us as we're trying to understand what happened in the past. And that might be an area that legal technology can facilitate.
Yeah, it sounds like, Justin, I mean, as I hear Casey and you talk about what information is valuable to the law department, it sounds like there's some, ideal scope of information that if you were to get on a daily basis or a monthly basis or whatever that frequency is, that gives your lawyers the ability to evaluate the level of value that they're receiving from those legal services, right? In some cases, it's quantitative. In some cases, it's about the hard numbers related to the data. And in other cases, it sounded like from previous conversations that, and maybe Casey, even in what you had just said, there's this qualitative factor that somehow we need to connect to the quantitative numbers to figure out whether I'm actually getting, or the fees that I'm paying, do I feel good about them at the end of the day? Now, keeping that in mind, if I switch to the law firm panelists, Michael, Peter, and Karen, are you guys on the firm side, as we think about this concept of Viewabill and the fact that in many cases we're thinking that, hey, look, the transparency actually provides and demonstrates value in a number of ways. If we can show our law departments that we are, on top of the way that we establish our time, that we can provide the transparency, if we boil it down, it's that the tool actually in some cases enables you to demonstrate the value that the firm is providing. If you think about looking ahead then on the firm side, are there other things that the firms are looking at that you think would help demonstrate the value of the legal services that you're providing? That if you had a magic wand and said, if we could get, in a perfect world, the ability to do this or have the feature that does X, we would take it because we think it actually, if transparent, would provide and demonstrate the value that we're providing to our legal service, or sorry, to our clients. Is there anything on your short list in terms of things that you would think would help you demonstrate that value better?
This is Peter. From my perspective, the start of Viewabill is the low-hanging fruit in project management, where you've established what you think your run rate should be, and enables somebody to easily and quickly be able to see where that might be veering off. So to me, that's the quick out of the box assistance with what we have going. The longer term, love seeing the ROI stuff. I think that I'm fortunate to be with a firm that's able to provide that to their clients, and sometimes in very extreme cases. And I think part of it is, what is this case strategy, and how are we going about it, and what are the efforts, and what are we going to do up front? I mean, here's what we think, initial case assessment, but here are the things that we think we can do to reduce the cost of legal spend, and I mean entirely, not just the cost of the spend of the services, but the overall risk to the client, and improve that situation. I think that's what we need to be able to demonstrate further. I mean, we talk about value. In the end, it is how much were we able to save the client from having to spend, and how efficient were we at doing that. So I don't know how we're going to get there on that part, whether it's having the sort of the case strategy laid out and then show what actually happened as the course went along, and and how those efficiencies provided a better value to the client.
Great. Karen, Michael, anything to add there? I have one last question, but I wanted you to be able to comment on just anything that you're doing on the firm side, or that you think would, if you had the ability to kind of move from where you are today to maybe, in a practical sense, kind of the next couple of things that you would do. Is there anything that sits high on your radar?
This is Karen. I think, in using Viewabill and with our project management initiative, maybe being able to somehow integrate a little bit more of our project management information into the Viewabill sort of platform. We talked about staffing, maybe some way to give that a little bit more transparency also, not just, the billable hours, but how we're staffing things and why. Just kind of down the same lines we were just talking about.
Sure. I'll ask one final question, and Michael, I think you've joined us back, and this may be, this one may create another spur of conversation, but Michael, I'll give this one to you. As we think ahead, a lot of the questions that we often get, I think even within your law departments, within the law firms and the companies that Robbie and I are in, we get a lot of questions about how are we too idealistic to think that lawyers may actually leverage these tools on a day-to-day basis moving forward? So, Michael, I'll ask you the question. What is it really going to take for us to get lawyers adopted to these things from a technology perspective? Are we crazy in our mind to think that these simple tools can actually be part of the lawyer's day-to-day practice, or do we really think, based on where we've gone so far and the speed of the maturity, do we really feel that these products will be used typically by groups within the organization that kind of concierge service them to their lawyers, or do we feel that lawyers can actually use these tools on a day-to-day basis? And just comment, if you can, on kind of where you see your firm to be and the challenges we may face kind of getting to that holy grail.
Well, I think that what's going to drive this are our clients. I think that lawyers, everyone's different, and different practices are used to different things, but our lawyers left to their own devices, will not necessarily, a very small percentage will see the benefit unless clients drive them to that. However, I think it's imperative that we do that. I did this before. We have a litigation client that their fees increased by 50%. It's a very large client in 1 year. What they asked us to do was to say, look, we want you to partner with us to help control our costs. What we want to do is we want you to come up with a way which, beyond the UTDMS codes, to help segment so that we can see on a frequent basis how we're doing against established budgets. And they, at this point, they've asked for, weekly updates. I do see the time, depending on the intricacy of the matter and how much it costs, where clients, we already see some sophisticated clients and their in-house teams monitoring on an ongoing basis because they can catch early on both, first of all, the timing. Are people working, contemporaneous with the expectation when there's really time constraints? In terms of value, how much time is going into each phase if you're budgeting by matter phase, particularly in a large litigation, as was alluded to before. I think that's imperative. And so if you see it in real time and you know your clients are looking at it, then you're going to be forced to focus on it in that real time. Now, I won't say that we do this with every client, but there are clients that are sophisticated that want that information. Where we're doing that, we are very open in terms of where we are. We've established the budgets together. We're monitoring them together. We're relaying information on as frequent a basis as a client requests. And frankly, I know it may seem like the opposite. I, from the firm's perspective, welcome that because it forces us to be more disciplined. And that discipline means that we will be more efficient and more effective. And, we, in the end, we'll make more money. And I know that that's, that there are firms that don't believe that. I mean, you make your largest margins in your niche practices. In your commoditized practices, where there's much more pressure from outside competition and your clients, where their budgets are over, budget oversight is incredible, that you have to do that to be able to match over a long-term basis. If you're looking for a long-term client relationship, and I think one of the things we see, and of course it depends on types of matters, but our client base, the top 50 turn over about a third every year, and some of that is because of the size of a particular matter. But if you want long-term longevity, which is the foundation of what you need to build on, you've got to be able to do that. So I think that our lawyers are buying into it, but it's taking time. They're not going to buy in all at once.
Yeah, Michael, I think you make a good point. I mean, one of the things that I think these solutions are doing is, I mean, you mentioned this, it's teeing up the conversation, or at least creating the environment where the conversation now becomes tangible. And it is a quite difficult conversation to have without the presence of technology, more or less because it requires that somebody has to tee it up, or somebody has data that's only known by one side or the other, where in this case, what's happening is that both sides actually have access to the information. I think, Connie stated something very early on in the session about the performance reviews that she was doing. And one of the things that we learned through that was that the conversation itself was just as valuable as where the needle had moved to. And I think, Robbie, I'll hand it back to you, but I think it's a lot of what we're hearing is, that just enough technology, even if we move forward, it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity to innovate. There's a ton of opportunity to create new tools and features and functionality that can provide some benefit, but it sounds like just enough technology to tee up the conversation has done quite some wonders. Robbie, I'll hand it back to you. I know that you wanted to spend some time to wrap up, and with that, thanks guys for the comments. Dan, I'm not sure if Robbie is online or if he is on mute. Okay, well, while he comes back online, any of the panelists, Casey, Michael, Justin, Peter, and Karen, anything just on your minds to wrap up before we give Robbie the chance to come back online?
This is Justin. I guess one thought with legal technology providers that we've encountered is that companies, vendors that provide like one niche tiny thing, like let's say, just a way for, say, to like produce and send invoices, are really challenging for us, even if we like their idea, because of the extensive IT review we have to do now with new technology vendors internally, the scrutiny those contracts are getting, a lot because of the cyber risks that have been, prominently reported in the past year or so. And so there's certainly an effort to work with fewer providers and to understand their security protocols and how their technology works, and providers that do more for us. There's kind of a threshold now for us to take someone on because of the cost and effort involved, that we need to see a threshold level of added value. So, whether that's more smaller ideas or bigger ideas that will really push us forward, it's harder maybe now than it was even a year or 2 years ago for us to want to take on a new technology vendor.
And this is Casey. I'll follow that up with, I think there's a lot of room for what Elevate is doing and also what Ken is doing with SafeArt Lean, because there's only so much time for in-house counsel to evaluate every new technology, every metric. And so providers who bring a bundle of metrics and a bundle of technologies are extremely useful. I've heard Connie talk about the setup she has with Elevate, and it clearly provides a lot of value, but also takes a huge load off of Connie and Mike. And it's one thing if you have to evaluate the technology. It's another thing if you are just the recipient of the data. So you could come up with a new measuring tool, and if Elevate's doing the measuring, or SafeArt Lean is doing the measuring, and it's simply communicating the data to Justin Liu at MGM, then you don't have those concerns. You don't have the attention and cognitive loads that evaluating tools really, it is a true challenge. I walk around, ILTA or legal tech, and no matter how much time I'm willing to spend at a booth, I could come away with 600 hours of commitments to webinars to sit through a technology, and that's not even getting into the actual evaluation of it by our IT folks. So yeah, I'm just seconding Justin. I think that creates an opening for the Elevates and the SafeArt Leans of the world to provide a real value-added service.
Hey guys,
Yeah,
sorry, are you guys able to hear me now?
we are. Yes, Robbie, we are.
Thank God. Sorry, I heard you handing it back to me, and for some reason nobody could hear me. I just want to thank everyone for not only participating and not only for listening and staying the whole time. I know we ran over, but this has been, I think, so meaningful for Viewabill for sure, but hopefully everybody has been able to see that there's a lot more to the attorney-client, and when I say attorney-client, I'm referring to generally the attorney-client relationship than just billable hours and end result, and that the communication that takes place during the billable hours is oftentimes as important as the hours themselves. And as an industry, we have a long way to go, but my feeling certainly is, and it sounds like the general sentiment is, that after all these years, we're finally making progress. And there's going to be lots of new types of products that we're all opening the door for here, and I think that's great. The more we are all able to communicate, whether it's within the context of your attorney-client relationship, but also with the third-party vendors and software to software. Pratik and I talk often, and I think that will enable both of us to make products that work better for all of you. And I just want to thank you all for joining us, for staying, participating. We will send a survey to everybody shortly. It should be going out right after this webinar. It would be great if you took the time to just fill out the questionnaire. It's very brief. It's just about the webinar itself, so that we could continue to partner with you guys to put on these types of events and you know, get better as time goes on. So thank you all, and I apologize for a couple of the technical difficulties we had, but it happens, and that's the fun of it all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Hi, Robbie. I'm gonna try to shut this down. In the meantime, I believe we're still recording, so just bear with us and while we shut it down. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, no problem. Thank you, guys. And Daniel, I'm here. I'll wait till everybody signs off before closing out.
Okay. You can actually, if you have, if you're able to close it from your screen, go ahead. My screen froze, but we're working on closing it down.
Okay, I'm gonna end it. Okay.
You got it.